I'm a marine science technician with the U.S. Coast Guard. I've spent years patrolling the waters, running inspections on fishing vessels, oil rigs, cargo ships, you name it. Nothing really phases me anymore, or so I thought. I've seen enough to know the ocean has secrets. But what we found when we boarded the Abyssal Queen made even the toughest among us uneasy. A few days ago, we received an emergency call about a massive oil tanker drifting off the Gulf of Alaska, dead in the water. Its beacon had been going off for nearly a week, but no one had responded to it. That was odd. The Abyssal Queen was owned by a reputable company. Someone should have checked on it long before we got there. By the time we arrived, the thing looked like it had been abandoned for years. The sea was calm as we pulled up alongside the rusted hull, but there was an eerie silence around the ship, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. I strapped on my gear, double-checked my radio, and followed Lieutenant Harris up the ladder onto the main deck. As I hauled myself over the railing, a sickly smell hit me, a mixture of rot, rust, and something off. Not just the usual rank of stale seawater. This was different. The crew was gone, not a soul in sight. The whole vessel seemed to echo with an unsettling emptiness. We tried the radio, but there was nothing but static. The Abyssal Queen was as dead as the water she floated on. Harris and I exchanged uneasy glances before heading to the bridge to start the inspection. Inside, the lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the walls. We found a half-eaten meal sitting on a table in the crew's mess, untouched and molding. The ship's log was open, detailing their last course, which was supposed to take them straight to port 3 days ago. But the last entry just stopped. No notes, no sign-off, nothing. "What do you think happened?" Harris asked, his voice low. "Pirates? Abandonment?" I shrugged. Maybe they saw something they didn't like and just jumped ship. But I didn't believe that, not really. This was too strange. We split up to cover more ground, and I headed down to check the storage holds. It was dark in there, and the beams of my flashlight barely pierced the shadows. That smell got stronger the deeper I went, thick and sickly sweet, like decay. Finally, I reached the first storage hold. I swung the door open, and the stench nearly knocked me back. I held my breath, shining my light inside, and froze. It was packed, floor to ceiling, with animals, or what used to be animals anyway. Thousands of dead fish, crabs, and seabirds, all piled on top of each other in a grotesque mountain of lifeless bodies. Their eyes were cloudy, their scales and feathers dull and matted with something. Black slime oozed from their mouths and eyes, pooling on the floor. I could barely keep my breakfast down. "Jesus," I whispered. I pressed the button on my radio. "Harris, you gotta see this." A crackle, static, nothing. "Harris, come in." Only silence. I backed away, desperate to escape the smell, but every step I took seemed to make the air heavier, thicker, as if the walls themselves were breathing. I heard a soft, wet slapping sound coming from down the corridor, something dragging across the metal floor. My heart hammered as I shined my light down the hallway. Nothing. I knew I wasn't alone, though. I could feel something watching me, lurking just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I hurried down to the second hold, trying Harris again. My fingers were shaking now, and my grip on the radio was white-knuckled. I took a deep breath and swung the door open. My light flickered over the storage space, and I swear my blood turned to ice. The second hold was filled with people, but they weren't alive. Dozens of bodies dressed in ragged clothing, stacked together like discarded cargo. Their skin was pallid, stretched tight over their bones, and they had that same black ooze leaking from their eyes, ears, and mouths. The expression on each face was the same, frozen in a twisted, agonized scream. I stumbled back, dropping my flashlight. It rolled across the floor, casting twisted shadows across the room. I grabbed it, my hands trembling, and noticed something even worse. Each body was covered in strange, dark marks, symbols carved deep into their skin, looping and curling in patterns I didn't recognize. My stomach lurched as I realized they weren't random. These symbols looked intentional, like someone, or something, had etched them into the flesh. And their eyes, I could feel them staring at me, even though they were dead. That's when I heard the voice. It was soft, almost a whisper, coming from somewhere behind me, slithering through the air. Leave. I turned, but there was no one there, just shadows stretching along the walls, shifting like something was lurking within them, waiting. Leave, it repeated, louder this time with a raspy, desperate edge. I backed away, stumbling over the bodies as I scrambled toward the exit. I had to find Harris. I had to get off this ship. I was halfway to the deck when I found him, or at least what was left of him. He was sprawled on the floor, his eyes wide and unseeing, with that same black sludge leaking from his mouth. His face was twisted, frozen in terror, and his radio lay shattered beside him. There was no sign of a struggle, no wounds, just that look, like he'd seen something too awful to bear. I fell to my knees, bile rising in my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. Then, from somewhere below, I heard it. The sound of footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. Slow, deliberate, growing louder with every step. I didn't wait to see who or what was coming. I forced myself to my feet and bolted for the ladder, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear it behind me now. That voice, louder, chanting something I couldn't understand. I didn't dare look back. I reached the deck, and as I scrambled over the railing and back onto our cutter, I caught a glimpse of something in the window. It was a figure, shrouded in shadows, watching me with hollow, empty eyes. Its face was pale and featureless, save for a twisted, inhuman grin. I hit the deck of the cutter hard, and my crew grabbed me, hauling me to my feet as I struggled to catch my breath. They kept asking what had happened, where Harris was, but all I could do was point back at the ship, still drifting silently in the water. By the time I found my voice, all I could manage was a whisper. Don't go back there. They thought I was in shock, that I'd hallucinated the whole thing, but I knew what I'd seen. The Coast Guard later sent another team to investigate, but when they reached the location, the Abyssal Queen was gone. No trace of it anywhere, not even an oil slick. To this day, I don't know what I saw on that ship, or why it was filled with those dead creatures and mutilated bodies. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear that voice, whispering in the darkness, telling me to leave. I know it's still out there, somewhere in the cold, black depths of the ocean, waiting, and sometimes, I wonder if it's waiting for me.